The story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard is a sad one. Indeed, it is the tale of a tragedy that resulted from one of the cruelest forms of parenting out there. Subjected to unnecessary and excessive medical procedures and medications by her mother, Gypsy's body and mind were continuously maltreated for over 20 years before violence ended it all. This is the life and story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. My name is Zach, and you are watching Crime Origin. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born in 1991 to Dee Dee and Rod Blanchard. She was an only child, and under normal circumstances, this would have set her up for lots of love and attention. However, in this case, it caused her a sad life from childhood. Little Gypsy was only 3 months old when her mother Dee Dee claimed her daughter had sleep apnea and began taking the infant for numerous doctor visits and medical appointments. After repeated rounds of tests, including overnight stays at the hospital with sleep monitors, the doctors found no evidence of the condition that Dee Dee claimed that her daughter suffered from. Instead of returning home, excited to learn that her daughter was healthy, Gypsy's mother hatched a new plan. Dee Dee was once a nurse aide, which made her claims and diagnosis more believable. When doctors didn't believe her sleep apnea diagnosis, Dee Dee stated that her daughter had a wide range of medical conditions due to some supposed chromosomal disorder. One of the conditions Gypsy's mother convinced the world that her daughter had was muscular dystrophy, which she then made the little girl use a walker for. When Gypsy was around 7 years old, she was riding with her grandfather on his motorcycle, and they had a mild accident, with Gypsy only suffering a minor graze. Immediately, Dee Dee learned of this. She recommended that her daughter be assigned a wheelchair, and just like that, Gypsy was confined to a chair for much of her life. In the years that followed, Dee Dee eventually stopped Gypsy from attending school well before first grade, supposedly due to her numerous illnesses. This psychotic mother opted to poorly homeschool her child. In the end, Gypsy learned to read on her own with the Harry Potter books. Growing up, Gypsy and Dee Dee lived with Claude Anthony Petrie, Dee Dee's father, and his new wife. During that time, Dee Dee would consistently poison her stepmother's food by adding weed killer to it. And eventually, this conscious poisoning led to the unsuspecting woman to develop severe illness. After a while, some people who had been with the family began to suspect that Dee Dee was lying about Gypsy's conditions and questioned her involvement in her stepmother's deteriorating health. Before she could be caught, Dee Dee moved her and Gypsy to another town in New Orleans, living off child support checks sent by Gypsy's father, Rod. Gypsy's mother secured public medical assistance checks due to her daughter's supposed medical illnesses. Dee Dee brought Gypsy to different hospitals and doctors, compounding illnesses which now included vision and hearing problems. She also told the doctors that Gypsy had been suffering from seizures, which prompted the doctors to prescribe anti-seizure medications for the youngster. In addition to subjecting her daughter to seizure medications, there were several surgeries carried out on little Gypsy for a barrage of conditions. Following the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Gypsy and her mother lived out of shelter for special needs individuals. Dee Dee told the attendants that Gypsy has medical conditions that needed medical attention. When she was asked about her medical history report and birth certificate, she told them they had been destroyed in the floods. In addition to dealing with numerous fabricated illnesses, Gypsy lived most of her childhood and teenage years without knowing her real age because her mother constantly changed her date of birth, reducing her age drastically. This was done in a bid to prevent Gypsy from revealing she was an adult and exercising her right to freedom. To add to her long list of atrocities, Dee Dee subjected Gypsy to using a feeding tube and continued to feed her nutritional supplements for kids, even while she was well into her teens. In 2007, Gypsy received the award for Child of the Year by the Oli Foundation, a charity that advocates for the rights of people on feeding tubes. Following this event, the charity donations for Gypsy continued to pour in, with the Habitat for Humanity building Gypsy and her mother a small house, complete with a wheelchair ramp. Sympathy for the disabled girl with a single mother displaced by Hurricane Katrina was the talk of the town, even making the local news, with the community making donations to help out with their medical expenses. The support and charities didn't stop within the community, as the mother-daughter pair received other forms of help, such as free flights from airlines for doctor's appointments, free trips to Disney World from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts. If you're wondering just where Gypsy's father, Rod, was in all of this, well, we're just getting to that. According to Rod, he recalls always sending his daughter gifts and money. On numerous occasions, he asked to be allowed to visit with his second wife, but Gypsy's mother always found some reason to change the plans at last minute. He even recalled calling Gypsy on her 18th birthday, but was told by her mother, Dee Dee, not to mention her real age, because Gypsy thinks she's 14 years old. It turned out Gypsy's mother had told everyone that her father was a drunk addict who didn't care for Gypsy because of her conditions. Gypsy recalled being looked on favorably by people, which was understandable as she was 5 feet tall and, due to the barrage of unnecessary medications, had lost most of her teeth, was visually impaired, and had a childlike voice. She was bald because her mother always shaved her head, telling her it didn't matter. After all, she would lose the hair eventually due to chemotherapy for a supposed case of cancer, and it was better to shave it beforehand. When out of the house, Dee Dee would bring along an oxygen tank, a feeding tube for her supplements, with Gypsy still in a wheelchair, even though she could walk on her own just fine. Gypsy was fed children's liquid supplements even into her 20s. Bear in mind that at the same time, she still thought she was a teenager. Gypsy was also physically abused by her mother, who used physical force to control and compel her whenever she would act out. If Gypsy ever tried to walk or make a statement that even remotely suggested she wasn't a disabled child, she would be beaten at home with a wire hanger. Gypsy was subjected to more unnecessary medical treatments, with Dee Dee having her salivary glands treated with Botox and then removed altogether. This was to control Gypsy's supposed drooling, which was just a case of Dee Dee forcing her daughter to take topical anesthetics in her mouth before going to the hospital. All of the procedures and medications caused Gypsy's teeth to decay so much that she lost most of her teeth and had to wear a bridge. Her ears were also inserted with tubes for her supposed ear illness. Things began to close in on Dee Dee when Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, who had treated Gypsy for muscular dystrophy, began to suspect something was off, as he found no evidence of the diseases when he treated her. The doctor then called Gypsy's pediatrician back in her hometown, where she was first treated, as he was told the tests were also negative there as well. He was informed that both mother and daughter were registered under different dates of births at both hospitals. He also found it strange that Gypsy could stand when he told her to, but her mother insisted that it was just a rare occasion. After considering all of these, Bernardo immediately began to consider the possibility that Dee Dee was suffering from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which was manifesting through the exaggerated medical conditions on her daughter. He, however, didn't report his findings and suspicions to Child Services or the police, as he was advised to tread lightly. He did the next best thing he could by placing an anonymous call to the police, informing them that Dee Dee was lying about her daughter's health, and Gypsy was in better health conditions than her mother would have everyone believe. The police were, however, a dead end when they fell for the rules of Dee Dee after she explained that the reason she changed her and Gypsy's birth certificate was to get away from her drunk and abusive husband. Following this revelation, the police left and the case was closed. Gypsy, however, was growing independent, and after seeing her true birth certificate by accident, she realized she was in her early 20s and not 16 years old, as her mother had her believing. One time, at a science convention, Gypsy recalled meeting a man who was also in his early 20s, and she followed him to his room. Dee Dee found them not too long after and threatened to have the man arrested, as Gypsy was still a minor. This was the first time Gypsy had gotten away from her mother, and she wanted a taste of freedom now. Upon getting home after the incident, Dee Dee smashed Gypsy's computer and told her she would smash her fingers next if she even tried anything like that again. Gypsy recalled that her mother had gone to the police shortly after to file paperwork claiming Gypsy was mentally impaired, and if she ever ran to the police, they would simply revert her back to her mother. Everything changed when Gypsy met Nicholas Godejohn online in 2012 using a computer after her mother had gone to sleep. Nicholas was from Wisconsin and wasn't exactly the most decent choice for a first boyfriend. He had a criminal record, a history of mental illness, and Asperger's syndrome, not to mention a thing for BDSM, which he quickly introduced Gypsy to. Both of them would go on to talk for over 2 years, with Gypsy explaining her situation to Nicholas, and both of them brainstorming to get her out of it. Nicholas even came over to Springfield, where Gypsy lived, where they both met up when Gypsy was out seeing a movie with her mother. The next time Nicholas would come back to town was not for a simple gesture anymore. On the contrary, his next meeting would be on a murder mission. Dee Dee's murder. In June of 2015, Nicholas returned to Springfield and came over when Dee Dee was already asleep. Gypsy let him in, gave him a knife, some gloves, and duct tape to aid him in his mission to kill Dee Dee as she slept. Gypsy hid away in her bedroom as Nicholas entered Dee Dee's room and proceeded to stab her 17 times in the back as she slept. The two proceeded to have sex in Gypsy's room while her mother's lifeless body was in the other room. And afterwards, they left with over $4,000 in cash that Dee Dee had hidden away. The pair ran away to a motel just outside Springfield before taking a bus to Nicholas's home in Wisconsin. Investigation. It wasn't until after a few days that neighbors noticed that neither Gypsy nor her mother had been out and about like they usually were, and after spotting Dee Dee's car still in the driveway, they suspected something was off. After repeated calls with no response and knocking with no response either, the concerned neighbors contacted the police. The police arrived and, after obtaining a search warrant, broke into the house only to find a deceased Dee Dee with no sign of Gypsy. The news of Dee Dee's passing was tragic to the community, as she was seen as a devoted and selfless mother who cared deeply for her daughter's well-being. They equally felt pity for the missing Gypsy, who they thought would be helpless at the hands of her captors without her wheelchair, oxygen mask, and mountain of medication she was used to taking. But things started to come to light when a neighbor, Aaliyah, roughly the same age as Gypsy, told the police that Gypsy had told her of a guy she met on Facebook who was coming to visit her sometime soon. Because Gypsy had used Aaliyah's computer to chat with Nicholas, it had his name and Facebook profile on it. The police tracked the IP address to Wisconsin, where they caught Nicholas, but were surprised to find Gypsy comfortable with her supposed captor. But most shocking was the fact that she could walk absolutely fine. Trial and sentencing. Upon interrogating Gypsy and Nicholas, they both confessed to killing Dee Dee, with Gypsy revealing how her mother had kept her captive in her own body by subjecting her to unnecessary medical procedures and medications, leaving her physically and mentally scarred. The penalty for murder in the state of Missouri can carry the death penalty, but due to the complicated nature of the case and considering the fact that Gypsy was a victim of long-term abuse, the prosecution did not seek the death penalty. Her lawyers argued that her case was so unique that Gypsy, at 23 years old, had gained almost 20 pounds in the county jail due to 2 decades of the undernourished liquid supplements she was fed by her mother. Gypsy gave in to a plea bargain and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Nicholas, on the other hand, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for first-degree murder. In an interview with BuzzFeed, Gypsy revealed that she feels more free and alive in prison than she felt her entire life.